but he also witnessed through his character and actions. He was a man of deep integrity and unshakable faith. Like his friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel was determined to remain loyal to God, even if it cost him his life. The story of Daniel in the lion's den is one of the most familiar stories in the Bible. It provides us with a powerful example in steadfastness under pressure, and it bears witness to God's power to deliver. Daniel's experience teaches us how to be faithful witnesses whenever our faith is tested. Daniel's story confirms the truth of the profound words of the Apostle Paul from 1 Corinthians 10:13. No temptation has overtaken you except such as is common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able, but with the temptation will also make the way of escape, that you may be able to bear it. If we remain steadfast under pressure, God will deliver us. Our faithfulness will influence everyone around us, and God will be glorified. Okay, history. Daniel chapter 5, verses 30 to 31 marks a pivotal movement in history with the death of Belshazzar and the rise of Cyrus, the Persian king, signaling the transition from the Babylonian Empire to the Medo-Persian Empire on October 12, 539 BC. Shortly after this conquest, the events of Daniel 6 unfolded as the new administration took shape. During this period, some Jewish exiles, led by Zerubbabel, began returning to Jerusalem to rebuild their homeland. Meanwhile, Daniel, now over 80 years old, continued to play a significant role within the shifting political landscape, demonstrating steadfast faith amid monumental changes in global power dynamics. Lesson overview. Daniel 6 describes an event that encapsulates Daniel's calling and experience through the first 6 chapters. This lesson reveals Daniel holding fast to a humble faith, even as God blessed him in dramatic ways. Daniel becomes the focus of an evil conspiracy that turns his faithfulness into an excuse for others to persecute him. Yet the prophet refused to compromise, even to the point of death. In the end, God delivered Daniel, and the pagan leader exalted Daniel's God. Daniel is a model for Christians today. God calls us to humility and faithfulness, through which we testify to a fallen world that the Lord we serve is the one and only true God. Introduction. Have you ever been falsely accused of something? Has that false accusation ever had negative consequences for you? This lesson highlights Daniel's unwavering faith in God amid challenges, with a focus on the added dimension of injustice. Throughout this unit, the recurring theme has been the testing of faith, but this lesson delves deeper into how unjust treatment can arise from living out our beliefs. Faith may sometimes lead others to mistreat us or to place us in difficult circumstances, but these trials often offer an opportunity to trust in God's care and guidance. Even in the face of adversity, we can find strength in knowing that God walks with us through hardships, leading us according to his promise. Okay, part 1, a conspiracy against Daniel. Daniel is above reproach, and this comes from Daniel chapter 6, verses 1 through 5. It pleases Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. Then this Daniel, distinguished himself above the governors and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. Excuse me. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the king, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any charge against this Daniel, unless we find it against him according to the law of his God." So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, "King Darius, live forever." And I kind of went one too far. At the end of Daniel 5, we read that Babylon was conquered by Darius, who was apparently a general under Cyrus. Daniel 6 opens with Darius the Mede being introduced as the leader of the Medo-Persian government in Babylon. Daniel, now about 80 years old, faced a transition to a new and different kingdom. Historians tell us Cyrus would negotiate with the leaders of the nations he conquered, and if they were willing to submit to his authority, we would allow them to continue in positions of leadership. Therefore, in verses 1 and 2a, when he appointed 120 satraps and 3 governors to direct the affairs of Babylon, Daniel was able to serve as one of the 3 governors who had authority over the kingdom. A satrap is an administrator over a province, and the 120 satraps excuse me. A satrap is an administrator over a province, and the 120 satraps reported to the 3 governors. In verse 2b, the system of accountability protected the king's interest, ensuring that he suffered no damage, meaning loss of revenue or power. In verse 3, Daniel's character and performance is described in 2 ways. First, he was preferred above all the other leaders. The Aramaic word translated preferred means Daniel distinguished himself and proved himself to be more capable. In his leadership, Daniel outshone all the ministers and satraps. Second, Daniel's distinguished performance was possible because an excellent spirit was in him. The word excellent signifies extraordinary or exceeding. Therefore, Daniel's success was due to an inward quality of excellence that was given to him by the Holy Spirit. The king took note of Daniel's impressive achievements and planned to promote him to an even higher status. The 120 satraps and 2 other governors soon became jealous of Daniel's outstanding performance. After all, he was not a native Babylonian. He was an outsider, one of the captives from Judah, and his Babylonian colleagues considered him to be an intruder and a usurper of their authority. Therefore, in verse A, they searched for a reason to criticize Daniel. Their jealousy and their eagerness to accuse Daniel find parallels in chapter 3, where we read that the Chaldeans accused Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego of insubordination. In verse 4b, Daniel's enemies thought they would find some failure or corruption as grounds for complaint, but their scrutiny of his life proved he was faithful in every area of his duties. In verse 5, his enemies could find no error or fault in him. Knowing Daniel's most prominent characteristic was his devotion to God, they proposed to use his faithfulness against him. Evil men set up Daniel. This comes from Daniel chapter 6, verses 6 through 9. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, "King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom and administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. Verses 6 and 7 record that these evil officials became conspirators, contriving a plot against Daniel, then appearing together before Darius to set it into motion. Following the customary greeting, they offered what seems to be an odd proposal. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Any man is a reference to pagan priests who would offer prayers to the gods on behalf of the people. This proposal stipulated that all prayers were to be made through Darius. This was not a suggestion that Darius set himself up as a god, but that Darius would be the sole priest in Babylon for the next 30 days. Nobody could pray to any god except through him. In verses 8 and 9, the rationale behind this decree was likely to create a situation where the now conquered Babylonians would demonstrate their loyalty to Persia, thereby contributing to the unity of the kingdom. Darius would serve as a mediator for the God for all of the nations that were now subject to him. Furthermore, a horrific and gruesome fate would await anyone who defied his decree. They would be torn to pieces by lions. The Persians were known for extreme forms of execution, and historical records indicate that they kept caged lions for this purpose. The officials insisted that the king put the decree into writing and declare it could not be repealed, probably to ensure that it was officially enacted before he realized their plot. They were successful in persuading Darius to sign the decree. Summary of part 1. Daniel chapter 6 verses 1 through 9 represents a relatable situation where envy or ambition drives against that harms others, be it workplaces, friendships, families, or even church communities. This passage invites introspection. Are we guilty of similar conduct? If so, there's a chance to mend our action and embrace kindness instead. When confronted with such behavior, respond carefully, relying on wisdom and grace to handle the matter, while upholding integrity and showing compassion toward those involved. Part 2, Daniel's faithfulness invites a challenge. Daniel refuses to compromise, and this comes from Daniel chapter 6, verses 10 through 15. Now when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any man, any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. So they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. The king signed the law. Therefore Daniel was faced with a life or death decision. He could refrain from praying during the 30-day period in which the law would be enforced, or he could continue the habit of daily prayer and risk being thrown to the lions. Unlike the story in chapter 1, where Daniel and his friends discussed the king's threats, the narrative in chapter 6 does not reveal Daniel's thoughts, nor his feelings regarding the law and its consequences. Apparently his feelings are not the point of the story, rather his faithful actions are the focus. In verse 10-8, Daniel responded to the law by continuing his daily prayers. Daniel could have prayed in secret, hoping he would avoid detection. Instead, he continued his routine, opened his window toward Jerusalem, and prayed openly. Apparently in verse 11, he was aware of his enemy's scheme and chose to maintain his integrity, even if it resulted in death. In verse 10b, it is significant that Daniel not only prayed, but he gave thanks to God as well. Even in a time of persecution and danger, Daniel was thankful. Daniel prayed facing Jerusalem toward where the temple had once stood. Perhaps you remember the word God spoke to King Solomon in 2 Chronicles 7:15 and 16 regarding the temple. Now my eyes will be open and my ears attentive to prayer made in this place. For now I have chosen and sanctified this house, that my name may be there forever, and my eyes and my heart will be there perpetually. There are three main parties at work in Daniel 6. First is Daniel, a man of integrity and faithfulness, described as being without fault. Even on close examination, none could find any reason to accuse him. Therefore, he was entrapped and then punished for being a righteous person. From 1 Peter 3:14, he was suffering for righteous sake. Although his enemies tried to destroy him, God delivered him. The second party might be described as Daniel's colleagues, who become his enemies. They were determined to get rid of Daniel, even though he was an innocent and honorable man. The third party is King Darius, who was manipulated into playing a role in the unjust treatment of Daniel. The accusers brought their charges against Daniel to Darius, who was distressed that he had allowed himself to be tricked by Daniel's enemies. He knew Daniel had been entrapped unjustly. Therefore, the king attempted to save him. In verses 12 and 15, the men who brought charges against Daniel reminded the king that he could not avoid punishing Daniel. The law was irrevocable. Therefore, the king had no choice but to throw Daniel to the lions. Daniel enters the lion's den. This comes from Daniel chapter 6, verses 16 and 18. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, Your God whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. Even as Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, Darius further revealed his compassion and concern for Daniel. In verse 16 he said, Your God whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. Daniel had obviously gained the respect of Persian officials, just as he had the Babylonian officials before them. and God's favor continued to rest upon him. Although the reputation of Daniel's God is one who saves and performs miracles and endures, nonetheless, Daniel found himself hopelessly trapped in a den of lions. In verse 17, a large stone was placed over the door and sealed by the signet ring of the king and his officials. Soft clay was attached to the chains or ropes securing the stone, and the emblems on the face of their rings were pressed into it. No one would dare break the king's seal. There was not any possibility of escape or rescue for Daniel. In verse 18, with Daniel secured in the den, the king retired to the palace for the evening. Yet Darius was clearly troubled. He could not sleep and was not interested in distraction from any form of entertainment. He even refused to eat. Obviously, Darius held Daniel in high regard, whether it be because of his skills, his charisma, or his faith. Perhaps it was all three. Summary of part 2. Daniel chapter 6, verses 16 to 18 demonstrates how an unbelieving world can perceive God's presence and favor upon his people. Jesus affirmed this, explaining that the world would know we are his people by our love for one another. Christians are different and unique from the world. When we practice our faith in big and small ways, our Lord is revealed in our actions, words, and attitudes. Take time this week to evaluate how you can be a witness to the reality of Christ. Okay, part 3, God delivers and is revered. God protects Daniel. And this comes from Daniel chapter 6, verses 19 to 23. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamented voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Now the king was exceedingly glad for him, and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. In verse 19, the king's sincere concern caused him to arise very early and to go in haste to learn of Daniel's fate. In verse 28, crying out to Daniel, the king asked if God had been able to deliver him. The cry was in a tone of anguish, which displayed the depth of the king's emotional distress. There was also another reason for King Darius' urgency. In the ancient world, it was often the case, as it was here, that if a person punished with this kind of torture survived until morning, he would be pardoned. In verse 20b, Darius addressed Daniel as servant of the living God, a phrase that discloses the king's view of Daniel and his view of God. Because of Daniel's faithful witness, Darius was aware that the God of Israel is the living God. Also, the king was aware of Daniel's unwavering commitment to God, whom Daniel served steadfastly and consistently. In verse 21, Daniel addressed the king respectfully, without anger, arrogance, accusation, or criticism. By displaying consistent character, he demonstrated wisdom, and he maintained his witness in front of the king and all the people who were present to see his deliverance. The name Daniel means God is my judge, and God's deliverance of Daniel from the lion's den affirmed Daniel's name. Verse 22a states, God judged Daniel and found him innocent of all charges against God and against the king. In verse 23, he was delivered, in part because he was innocent, but also because he trusted in his God. Daniel's faith played a vital role in his deliverance. In verse 22b, Daniel was saved through the work of an angel. Angels play a significant role in the Bible. Sometimes angels are sent as messengers, but at other times, God sends angels to protect his people. In Daniel's dilemma, God sent an angel to shut the lion's mouth. Once again, circumstances in the book of Daniel caused the God of the Hebrews to be spotlighted and contrasted with pagan gods. Once again, the living God was shown for who he is, almighty, sovereign, and high above all powers.
Amen.
Including the gods of the conquering nations. Okay, Darius recognizes the true God. This comes from Daniel chapter 6, verses 24 to 28. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast him into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives. And the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Then King Darius wrote, to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and steadfast forever. And his kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. He delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. In the ancient Near East, anyone who made a false charge would be punished by receiving the same sentence that they had sought for their victim. Therefore, in verse 24, Daniel's enemies, along with their families, were thrown into the den of lions, where they were quickly destroyed. The lions' swift slaughter of Daniel's enemies proved Daniel had not escaped because the beasts were weak and sickly. Moreover, the lions had not avoided him because they had just eaten and were full. God delivered Daniel from strong, voracious, hungry lions. The end of this story contains elements reminiscent of the endings of the book's previous chapters. Chapters 1 through 3 conclude with a positive evaluation of the Hebrew exiles, their deliverance from a life-threatening situation, and their exaltation in the kingdom. The similarity of endings suggests God's preservation of his people is a major theme of the book of Daniel. Chapters 2 to 4 end with the king's confession that exalts and praises the God of Israel. Thus, the majesty of God should also be seen as a major theme of the book. Just as Nebuchadnezzar had done decades earlier, in verses 25 to 27, Darius made a public proclamation to glorify this one true God of the Hebrews. Several vital insights by Darius in this decree. First, God has an everlasting kingdom, unlike the kingdoms of this world. Second, God rescues his people. Third, God does supernatural wonders. Fourth, God's unlimited and unsurpassed power transcends the natural world and is effective in the heavenly realm. The reference to Cyrus the Persian in verse 28 seems to be an unnecessary addition to this story. But Cyrus later became an important character in Israel's history, serving as the means of their deliverance from the exile. King Darius recognized Daniel's deliverance was the working of God's signs and wonders. Going back to Israel's exodus from Egypt, signs and wonders have been one of God's ways of demonstrating his presence and directions in the world. God continues to work signs and wonders today. Daniel 6:28 reminds us Daniel remained in captivity. In truth, his entire adult life was spent in the lion's den of the exile. and God delivered him from the lions over and over. When we find ourselves under pressure, we must remember our commitment to God. In light of today's lesson, we should always do our best, so we will develop a reputation for integrity. We should rejoice with friends and co-workers who receive promotions, resisting the temptation to be envious and jealous. We should never cooperate with people who are trying to hurt others. Instead, we should be peacemakers. We should serve God faithfully and openly, even when pressured to compromise, trusting God to deliver us. Finally, we should forgive everyone who has plotted against us. Because of his faithfulness, in verse 28b, Daniel continued to prosper. When we use the word prosper, we usually have in mind financial abundance. But the Aramaic word tishlah was a deeper and broader significance. In this verse, prosper signifies Daniel's professional life was successful. His plans were moving forward toward completion, and his personal life was good. Daniel continued to prosper because he followed God's command from Deuteronomy 29:9 that had been given through Moses. Therefore, keep the words of this covenant and do them, that you may prosper in all that you do. Summary. Daniel chapter 6 verse 28 serves as a fitting conclusion to the preceding chapters, showcasing God's constant presence in Daniel's life. From the beginning, we see how God uniquely equipped Daniel for his divine purposes, and those plans continued to unfold as the years went by. In the same way, God has a plan for each of us, even if it may seem small or hidden at times. Like Daniel, God calls us to remain faithful and steadfast in his ways. Trusting him through life's challenges to his purpose can strive in us. Closing. We can learn much from Daniel's example. Daniel was trustworthy, faithful, and courageous. He was also steadfast in prayer, even though he knew it would cause him to be cast into the den of lions. In response to Daniel's example, let us ask God to strengthen our hearts with a desire to be a faithful witness. Because of his courageous and prayerful lifestyle, Daniel was given the opportunity to be a faithful witness of God's deliverance. Although his enemies despised his spirituality, King Darius benefited from Daniel's witness. We never know who will be most affected by our faithful witness. It may be a co-worker, a boss, a family member, a friend, or even a stranger. Let us be witnesses for Christ in our homes, in our churches, in our neighborhoods, and unto the uttermost part of the earth.
Amen.
Thank y'all for coming again next Sunday.